Hello world history students, Mr. Lassiter here, and in this video we're going to look at the path to civilization, our movement from being hunter-gatherers, which we were for 90% of our existence, to being farmers. So let's get started. Our video goals questions, we want to look at what exactly is this thing called civilization that I just mentioned, what was the Neolithic Revolution and what were its consequences, and what do civilizations have in common. So let's get started. It's a big topic. So first of all, let's define or try to define what a civilization is. One definition says that it's the stage of human social development and organization that is considered the most advanced. But is that really what it is? That's a pretty broad definition. How might we define being most advanced? And who gets to define being most advanced? Is it the Mayans in the year 900 CE? Or is it Europeans in the year 1750? Or is it the Chinese civilization in 200 BCE? Well, that's up for grabs. So historians have come together and really come up with a number of traits. We'll give you 8 in this video of what is needed really to be considered a civilization. But before we get there, I want you to think to yourself, what are the things that you think are needed to be considered a civilization? So list at least 3 to 4 things, pause the video, and move on once you have those in your notes. Now, to quickly recap, before humans learned to farm, of course, we were hunter-gatherers. And that was, again, 90% of human existence on Earth, from our origins in Africa in the year 150,000 BCE, roughly, we don't know an exact date there, or as humans over 50 to 100,000 years migrated out of Africa into Asia and Europe, and eventually to the Americas. Humans during that time period were nomadic. They moved from place to place. And they foraged. They gathered food and they hunted for sustenance. But eventually, humans began to develop the skills of agriculture. And this occurred independently in different parts of the world. We call this transition to agriculture the Neolithic Revolution, although it was not all at once. It happened over several thousand years. It first took place in the Middle East and in the Nile River Valley, but it does independently happen around the world. The term Neolithic means New Stone Age, actually, as opposed to the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age that we've talked about in previous videos. It's also known as the Agricultural Revolution. Now, this change does happen slowly, but if we talk about in terms of kind of cosmic history or human history overall, it does seem like it may have happened sort of quickly. So during this time, when people are learning to farm, they're domesticating plants and animals. There may have been a time period where we actually domesticated some animals first and kind of tended those herds before we settled down completely. But in general, we tamed plants and animals. We figured out that seeds were scattered in places where they're likely to grow. We used fire to clear fields, and we developed tools specifically for hunting. And you can take a look at the chart on the right to see kind of how this happened. Animals were similar. We, selected the dogs that were best for hunting and were nicest to us. We began to tame or domesticate sheep and goats for their milk, for meat, and for wool. And we even could use some animals to pull some of the tools we created for farming, like plows. And the result of all this, staying in place and learning to farm more and more land, is that humans began to produce more food than we needed to survive. And so we call this a food surplus. A surplus is when you just have more than you need of anything. So I want you to think about this before you move on. What are the consequences of a food surplus? Now that you've thought of that, let's go through kind of the process for this. Well, what if we don't need everyone to farm anymore, right? We have more food than we need, so people can do other jobs. We call this the specialization of labor. Instead of everyone being farmers, Now some people can be artisans. Some people can be scribes that write things. Some people might be able to just focus on defending a town. They might become the military. Some people might focus their entire life on learning about religion. So this is what we consider to be a specialization labor. People doing jobs other than farming. They may have been their hobbies before, now they become full-time gigs. There are also some people who can just ponder the question, how do we make even more food? And so they might improve technology in some ways. Or they might ask, how might we defeat the army in the next town over? And they make better weapons. Or how can I make prettier clothing? And they make better needles and looms. So this is where we see improved technology. Some people then say, well, people are doing different jobs. What jobs are the most valuable? And this is a stratification of society. Some people start to make more money or be held in higher esteem on the social ladder. Now, if people can buy more, now that they have more money, they start to accumulate possessions and own things. In hunter-gatherer society, people shared goods. But in farming society, people tended to have their own things. And people had different amounts of those things as well. And how do you keep up with all the things? Well, you might need a system of writing. How do you protect all the things? Well, let's have an army. How do we keep things in order? Well, we'll use religion. Well, that didn't work. Well, we'll use laws and government. And as all this is happening, you're producing more and more food because your technology is getting better and your population is growing. And that means more people in one place. So where do they all live? Well, probably at this point you're developing a city. And that is our first trait that we see in what a civilization is. Some of these will pop up in the next couple slides as well. So when we think about the development of civilization, those consequences of a food surplus, we have to know that it was not overnight. It was, as I've said before, evolutionary. It was very gradual. People learned to farm. The earliest farmers were somewhere around the year 8000 CE, something like 10,000 years ago. Now that change comes about in Mesopotamia, but we don't see the first cities and civilizations really develop in Mesopotamia for about 3,000 to 5,000 more years. So that's a pretty long time. So it's not a light switch necessarily. It's more like a up on and off. It's more like a dimmer switch that you turn very slowly, like if it took you 2,000 years to do so. So what are the actual traits of civilization? You don't have to memorize these. We do want you to be able to recognize them and be able to refer back to them and talk about them in discussion. So the traits of civilizations, number one, are cities, a place where many people can live, where people can do different types of work, and where people can exchange goods and ideas. In civilizations, we also see that political systems are not based on your family, but on territory. So, for example, this feudal map of Japan shows where these feudal lords control different territories under their power, not necessarily who they were related to. As I've said already, people also specialize their labor. So we're going to see people not or doing things that are not farming. In this case, weaving cloth. And because of that, some jobs are valued more than others. So we see a social hierarchy or social pyramid in most civilizations. And that's no different from how we live in the United States today. There are social hierarchies, mostly based on wealth. We also see in civilizations monumental building. This does not just mean that you have to build something really big like this ziggurat in Mesopotamia in what was called Ur. This is the ziggurat of Ur, or the pyramids in Egypt. That was not necessary. It could be just some type of large organized project, like irrigation in Egypt or sewer systems in the city of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus River Valley. It could be aqueducts of Rome. These monumental buildings showed that these civilizations and societies had the ability to organize labor to construct a large project, something that could not simply be done by 1 or 2 or 10 people. Another thing we see is a writing system or a system for keeping permanent records. In Egypt, this was hieroglyphs. In Mesopotamia, it was cuneiform. Chinese characters developed in China, but some way of keeping track of the amount of trade that was going on, and oftentimes keeping track of important religious tenets or observances. Of course, as I said earlier, cities were the center for trade. And so trading with people around you is important for civilization. Civilizations never develop in isolation. They are always interacting with people around them. That is the trade of goods and ideas. So that's something we're going to talk about a lot in this course, how ideas can be traded just like things can be traded. And the last thing is a sophisticated interest in science and art. And we're not talking about, just passing like, oh, look, the stars are pretty tonight. But in the Mayan civilization, in the city of Chichen Itza, which you see at the top, they had an observatory for the study of the stars. The Mayans had very advanced mathematics and astronomy. And in the bottom, on the island of Crete in the Mesopotamia, the Minoan civilization developed art. And this is art from a mosaic from a palace in Minoan Crete, where they worshipped the bull. Shout out to Durham, the bull city. So these are our traits of civilization. There are 8 of them. They're things that generally we see in civilizations. However, before you come into class tomorrow, I want you to think, can you think of a civilization that may be missing one or more of these things? Or a society that you think might be considered a civilization, but doesn't necessarily meet this definition? And if you can, I'd like to talk with you about it, because there are some that come to mind for me. The first civilizations that we think of and that we'll talk about in this course are found in Afro-Eurasia, and they're all developed around river valleys. And that's makes sense to us because, of course, water is so important for the development of agriculture. So in Mesopotamia, the civilization developed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, 2 different rivers. In Egypt, the Nile River Valley, the Nile River. In India, in the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, they were found in the Indus River region along the Indus River. And in China, the earliest Chinese civilization developed along the Yellow River of China. And so we sometimes call it the Huang Ho civilization or the Yellow River Valley civilization. So these are our 4 major river valley civilizations. There are certainly other foundational civilizations in the world, but these are the ones that we will concentrate on first. Take a look at the video goals questions and the vocabulary, make sure that you understand them, and I'll see you tomorrow in class.